The sudden, excruciating tightening of the calf muscle in the dead of night is a terrifying experience that plagues millions of older adults, transforming the sanctuary of sleep into a landscape of anticipated agony. This phenomenon, clinically recognized as nocturnal leg cramps, is far more insidious than a simple, passing inconvenience. It is a profound disruption of the body's delicate neuromuscular circuitry and a glaring alarm bell indicating deep-seated cellular imbalances that invariably accompany the aging process. For decades, the conventional medical advice has been stubbornly simplistic and largely ineffective, revolving around the tired mantras of merely eating more bananas for potassium or haphazardly swallowing a standard magnesium pill before bed. Yet, the persistence of these brutal nighttime spasms in the elderly population underscores a fundamental failure in understanding the intricate biochemistry of muscle contraction, cellular hydration, and electrical signaling. To permanently eradicate these debilitating cramps, we must fundamentally dismantle our preconceived notions about supplementation and journey into the microscopic realm of human physiology to address the true root cause. A profound, often undetected deficiency in a highly specific spectrum of ionic trace minerals, and crucially, the precise chronological timing of their administration. The absolute cornerstone of this revolutionary approach lies in the strategic introduction of highly absorbable, electrically charged trace minerals into the body immediately upon waking, in a completely fasted state prior to the consumption of the first meal of the day, a protocol that elegantly leverages the body's natural circadian rhythms and gastric empty states to achieve maximum intracellular penetration. To fully comprehend why this specific early morning protocol is the key to lifelong neuromuscular liberation, it is essential to first understand the astonishingly complex sequence of biological events that dictate how a muscle functions and, conversely, how it catastrophically locks up. Every voluntary physical action, from the sweeping motion of a joyous stride to the subtle adjustments of posture that prevent a fall, is governed by the brain sending an electrical impulse, known as an action potential, down the spinal cord and through the peripheral nervous system until it reaches the neuromuscular junction. This junction is the critical interface where the terminal end of a motor neuron meets the membrane of a muscle fiber, the sarcolemma. When the electrical signal arrives, it triggers the release of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which floods across the synaptic cleft and binds to receptors on the muscle cell, setting off a cascading wave of depolarization. This electrical wave dives deep into the interior of the muscle fiber through a network of microscopic tunnels called transverse tubules, ultimately communicating with the sarcoplasmic reticulum, an intricate, web-like organelle whose primary function is the storage and rapid release of calcium ions. In the resting state, the muscle fiber is relaxed because specific regulatory proteins, namely troponin and tropomyosin, are physically blocking the binding sites on the actin filaments, preventing them from interacting with the myosin heads, which are the biological motors of the muscle. However, when the signal from the nervous system prompts the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release its massive stores of calcium into the intracellular fluid, these calcium ions bind aggressively to troponin. This binding causes a profound conformational shift in the protein structure, effectively dragging the tropomyosin away from the binding sites and exposing them to the myosin heads. Utilizing the explosive energy released from the hydrolysis of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, the fundamental energy currency of the cell, the myosin heads latch onto the actin filaments and perform a power stroke, pulling the filaments toward the center of the sarcomere, the fundamental unit of muscle contraction. This microscopic sliding of filaments, occurring simultaneously across millions of sarcomeres within a fraction of a second, is what produces the macroscopic shortening of the muscle that we recognize as a contraction. The crisis of a muscle cramp, particularly the severe nocturnal variations that afflict the elderly, is almost never a failure of the contraction phase, but rather a catastrophic failure of the relaxation phase. For a muscle to successfully relax after a contraction, the process must be meticulously reversed, a task that is actually far more metabolically demanding than the contraction itself. The calcium ions that flooded the cellular interior to initiate the movement must be aggressively pumped back into the holding chambers of the sarcoplasmic reticulum against a steep concentration gradient. This monumental task of intracellular cleanup is performed by a specialized transport protein known as the circopump, which stands for sarcoplasmic/endoplasmic reticulum calcium ATPase. As the name implies, this pump requires a tremendous amount of ADP to function. However, there is a critical, often entirely overlooked biological caveat that lies at the very heart of the cramping epidemic. ATP is biologically inert and completely useless to the body unless it is bound to an ion of magnesium. MgATP is the actual active form of energy required by the Circa pump to sequester calcium and allow the muscle to relax. When a person is deficient in intracellular magnesium, the calcium remains trapped in the cytoplasm of the muscle cell, continually binding to the troponin, keeping the binding sites exposed, and forcing the myosin heads to remain locked in a state of perpetual, agonizing contraction. This biological gridlock is the true anatomy of a muscle cramp, a localized cellular energy crisis where the muscle is screaming for the enzymatic key to unlock its own rigid grip, but that key is missing. While the scientific community has long acknowledged the critical role of magnesium in preventing muscle spasms, the application of this knowledge has been tragically flawed, leading to the widespread frustration of patients who diligently take magnesium supplements yet continue to suffer from agonizing nocturnal cramps. The failure stems from a profound misunderstanding of bioavailability, mineral synergy, and the hostile environment of the human digestive tract, particularly as it ages. As we grow older, our bodies undergo a gradual but significant decline in the production of hydrochloric acid in the stomach, a condition known as hypochlorhydria. Hydrochloric acid is absolutely essential for the breakdown of dense, rock-like mineral compounds into a state that the body can actually absorb. Standard magnesium supplements, such as magnesium oxide or even supposedly superior forms like magnesium citrate, are complex compounds that require a highly acidic environment to be cleaved apart and rendered useful. In an older adult with diminished stomach acid, these pills simply traverse the gastrointestinal tract largely intact, pulling water into the colon through osmosis, which often results in unintended laxative effects rather than the desperately needed intracellular delivery to the starving muscle tissue. Furthermore, when these supplements are taken with food or in the evening, as is commonly recommended, they are thrust into a chaotic digestive arena filled with dietary antagonists. Compounds found in everyday healthy foods, such as phytic acid in grains and nuts, or oxalates in leafy greens, aggressively bind to minerals like magnesium, forming large, insoluble complexes that the intestines are utterly incapable of absorbing. The minerals are essentially kidnapped by the food matrix and excreted from the body, leaving the cellular deficiency completely unresolved. This brings us to the profound paradigm shift required to permanently end leg cramps: the strategic utilization of ionic trace minerals ingested in a pristine, fasted state before breakfast. To understand why this is so revolutionary, we must delve into the concept of ionic minerals. An ion is simply an atom or molecule that holds an electrical charge because it has either gained or lost an electron. In nature, plants absorb inorganic metallic minerals from the soil and, through the miraculous process of photosynthesis and complex root biome interactions, convert them into an organic, liquid, ionic state. In this electrically charged form, the minerals are incredibly minuscule, existing at the angstrom level, and do not require the intense mechanical and chemical breakdown of stomach acid to be utilized. When you consume a liquid suspension of ionic trace minerals upon waking, on a completely empty stomach, you are bypassing the aging digestive limitations entirely. Before breakfast, the stomach environment, although perhaps naturally lower in acid due to age, is free from the chaotic interference of digesting food. There are no phytates, no oxalates, and no competitive macronutrients to block absorption. The ionic minerals flow swiftly through the stomach and into the duodenum, the upper part of the small intestine, where the electrical charge allows them to be seamlessly drawn across the intestinal mucosa via specialized transport channels directly into the bloodstream. This immediate, unimpeded delivery system ensures that the blood serum is saturated with the necessary elemental building blocks long before the day's metabolic demands begin to deplete them. However, Resolving the cramping crisis requires looking beyond magnesium in isolation and recognizing the biological imperative of the hidden trace minerals that serve as absolute prerequisites for magnesium utilization. The human body does not operate on single nutrient mechanics. It relies on an incredibly vast and complex symphony of cofactors. Magnesium cannot effectively cross the cell membrane and enter the intracellular space without the presence of perfectly balanced trace elements such as boron, zinc, and specialized biological forms of sodium and potassium. Boron, for instance, is a profound regulator of mineral metabolism. It extends the half-life of magnesium within the blood and actively facilitates its transport across the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane. Without adequate boron, much of the magnesium circulating in the blood will be filtered out by the kidneys and lost in the urine. Similarly, zinc is a crucial structural component of thousands of enzymatic reactions, including those that construct and repair the cellular membranes themselves, ensuring the integrity of the ion channels that allow magnesium and calcium to flow in and out of the cell. The modern agricultural system, reliant on synthetic fertilizers that only replenish nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, has tragically stripped our topsoil of these vital trace elements. Consequently, our food supply is fundamentally devoid of the very catalysts our bodies need to function. By introducing a full-spectrum ionic trace mineral complex before breakfast, we are providing the body with the exact elemental blueprint it evolved to recognize, ensuring that when the magnesium arrives at the muscle cell, the biochemical doors are wide open and the nutrient is eagerly ushered inside. To truly grasp the transformative power of this morning protocol, we must employ the power of visualization and imagine a highly detailed 3D animation exploring the microscopic landscape of an aging muscle fiber. Picture a skeletal muscle cell in an elderly individual who suffers from chronic nighttime cramps. The cell appears visually distressed, almost desiccated, akin to a dried sponge. The extracellular matrix surrounding the cell is thick and sluggish, lacking the vibrant fluidity required for optimal nutrient exchange. The cellular membrane itself, the sarcolemma, is rigid and less permeable, a direct consequence of long-term oxidative stress and mineral depletion. Now, imagine the morning administration of the ionic trace mineral complex. We follow these electrically charged particles as they easily navigate the vast river of the circulatory system, arriving at the capillary beds interwoven among the muscle fibers. Because they are in an unbound, ionic state, they slip effortlessly through the capillary walls and enter the interstitial fluid. As the animation zooms in on the surface of the muscle cell, we see the specific receptors and transport proteins responding to the arrival of these crucial cofactors. Boron and zinc begin to interact with the membrane, restoring its flexibility and optimizing the function of the transport channels. The arrival of magnesium immediately initiates the activation of the sodium-potassium pump, a phenomenal biological machine embedded in the cell membrane that constantly works to pump sodium out of the cell and pull potassium in. This pump is profoundly energy-dependent, consuming nearly a third of all the ATP generated by the body at rest. And as we have established, ATP is utterly dependent on magnesium. As the magnesium fuels this massive restoration of the sodium-potassium balance, a miraculous secondary effect occurs: profound cellular hydration. Proper hydration is emphatically not about the sheer volume of plain water consumed. A person can drink gallons of purified water and remain fatally dehydrated at the cellular level if the water lacks the electrical gradient required to cross into the cells. Water follows minerals through the rules of osmosis. As the ionic trace minerals, particularly the potassium driven by the newly energized sodium-potassium pumps, flood into the intracellular space, they dramatically alter the osmotic pressure. In our 3D animation, we can visualize specialized water channels in the cell membrane, known as aquaporins, flinging wide open. Plump, life-giving water molecules rush through these aquaporins, following the mineral gradient into the interior of the muscle cell. The previously desiccated, raisin-like cell begins to swell, its structural integrity returning as it fills with fluid. This intracellular hydration is an absolute biological necessity for the prevention of muscle spasms. When a cell is fully hydrated, The internal environment is expansive and fluid, allowing the microscopic machinery of contraction and relaxation, the actin and myosin filaments, the troponin, the circa pumps, to glide smoothly and operate with optimal efficiency. The physical distance between the sliding filaments is maintained, preventing the dangerous biochemical friction and misfiring that triggers a localized spasm. Furthermore, this newly hydrated cellular state dramatically dilutes the concentration of metabolic waste products, such as lactic acid and reactive oxygen species, which naturally accumulate from daily movement and are known to irritate nerve endings and precipitate nocturnal cramping. The implications of this profound cellular rehydration and mineral balancing extend far beyond the mere, albeit deeply welcome, elimination of nighttime pain. It is a fundamental intervention against the relentless progression of sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, strength, and function. Sarcopenia is one of the most critical determinants of frailty, loss of independence, and mortality in the elderly population. While often viewed as an inevitable consequence of aging, modern cellular biology reveals that sarcopenia is aggressively accelerated by chronic, low-grade inflammation and the continual microtrauma inflicted by undetected cellular distress, such as recurring subclinical muscle spasms. Every time a muscle locks up in a cramp, it is essentially experiencing a localized hypoxic event, a deprivation of oxygen and blood flow. The immense mechanical tension of the spasm physically squeezes the capillary beds shut, cutting off the delivery of fresh oxygen and nutrients, while trapping highly acidic metabolic waste within the tissue. This creates a highly toxic, inflammatory microenvironment. The immune system responds to this cellular damage by sending in macrophages to clear away the dead and damaged tissue, a necessary process that unfortunately also degrades surrounding healthy muscle protein. When a person suffers from nightly cramps over the course of years, this repetitive cycle of trauma, inflammation, and degradation slowly but relentlessly eats away at the muscle architecture. By intervening with the pre-breakfast ionic trace mineral protocol, we are not just stopping the pain, we are fundamentally halting this silent, insidious process of muscular atrophy. By ensuring that the muscle cells are fully hydrated and electrically stable, we prevent the localized hypoxic traumas that trigger the inflammatory cascade, thereby preserving the precious muscle protein synthesis required to maintain mass. Furthermore, preserving this muscular integrity is the absolute foundation for what gerontologists refer to as structural independence. Structural independence is the physiological capacity of an older adult to interact with their environment safely, confidently, and autonomously. It is the ability to rise from a chair without assistance, to walk up a flight of stairs without debilitating fatigue, and, most crucially, to possess the rapid neuromuscular reflexes necessary to correct a loss of balance and prevent a catastrophic fall. Falls are a leading cause of fatal and non-fatal injuries among older adults, often leading to hip fractures, traumatic brain injuries, and a devastating downward spiral in overall health. The speed and power required to catch oneself during a stumble are generated by the fast twitch or type 2 muscle fibers. These specific fibers are highly dependent on rapid calcium cycling and abundant ATP availability, the exact biochemical pathways that are so violently disrupted by magnesium and trace mineral deficiencies. When the body is chronically depleted, these vital fast-twitch fibers are the first to atrophy and lose their explosive capacity. By prioritizing the morning absorption of essential trace minerals, we are specifically nourishing the electrical signaling pathways that govern these fast-twitch fibers. We are ensuring that the action potentials generated by the brain in a moment of imbalance can travel down the nervous system with lightning speed and instantaneously translate into a powerful, coordinated muscular response. The 3D animation in our minds can zoom out from the single cellular level to the entire facial network of the leg, showing how the hydrated, electrically optimized muscle fibers contract in perfect unison, providing the robust, shock-absorbing support the skeleton needs to navigate the physical world safely. The transformation achieved through this early morning protocol also radiates deeply into the psychological and neurological well-being of the individual. The chronic anticipation of pain is a profoundly destructive psychological burden. For an elderly person who has suffered from agonizing nocturnal cramps for months or years, The mere act of preparing for bed becomes an anxiety-inducing ordeal. As the sun sets, the sympathetic nervous system, the body's fight-or-flight mechanism, begins to ramp up in subconscious anticipation of the impending trauma. This chronic psychological stress triggers the continuous release of cortisol, a catabolic stress hormone that actively breaks down muscle tissue for quick energy and profoundly suppresses the immune system. Elevated nighttime cortisol also aggressively interferes with the delicate architecture of sleep, preventing the individual from entering the deep, restorative stages of slow-wave sleep and rapid eye movement, REM, sleep. During these deep sleep phases, the brain engages in critical maintenance tasks, clearing out neurotoxic waste products like amyloid beta plaques, consolidating memories, and releasing human growth hormone to repair the physical wear and tear of the day. When sleep is continually fractured by the excruciating pain of a calf cramp, or simply by the anxious hyperarousal anticipating one, the brain and body are systematically deprived of this fundamental restoration. The resulting sleep deprivation accelerates cognitive decline, exacerbates depression and irritability, and dramatically amplifies the perception of pain, creating a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of suffering. When the morning ionic mineral protocol is successfully implemented, the cessation of the nighttime cramps produces a cascading psychological liberation that is nothing short of miraculous. The first morning an individual wakes up realizing they have slept through the night without a single spasm is often a moment of profound emotional relief. As the anxiety surrounding sleep begins to dissipate, the nervous system shifts out of its chronic sympathetic dominance and back into a restorative parasympathetic state. Cortisol levels normalize, allowing the natural circadian rhythm of melatonin production to orchestrate deep, uninterrupted sleep. The restoration of this sleep architecture has immediate, tangible benefits for cognitive function. Memory recall improves, brain fog lifts, and emotional resilience is vastly enhanced. The individual wakes up feeling genuinely rested and biologically younger, equipped with the mental clarity and physical vitality to engage with their life, their family, and their passions. This psychological uplift creates a powerful positive feedback loop. Feeling physically better and mentally sharper encourages a more active lifestyle, which in turn stimulates bone density, improves cardiovascular health, and further strengthens the neuromuscular system against decline. Integrating this specialized knowledge into a daily routine requires a holistic understanding of how human biology interacts with its environment throughout the day. While the ingestion of the ionic trace minerals before breakfast is the pivotal intervention, its efficacy can be dramatically amplified by aligning other lifestyle factors to support cellular hydration and metabolic efficiency. For example, the type of water used to consume the morning minerals is crucial. It should ideally be pure, unchlorinated water to avoid introducing oxidative stressors that the body must expend energy to neutralize. Following the morning protocol, the first meal of the day should be strategically designed to support sustained blood sugar levels, avoiding massive insulin spikes that can drive minerals out of the bloodstream and into storage excessively fast, disrupting the delicate balance. Incorporating healthy fats, high-quality proteins, and complex, fiber-rich carbohydrates ensures a steady, slow release of energy that complements the newly optimized cellular metabolism. Furthermore, engaging in appropriate, targeted physical activity is essential to signal to the body that the newly hydrated and nourished muscle fibers need to be maintained. For the elderly demographic, this does not mean rigorous, joint-destroying workouts, but rather consistent, intelligent movement patterns. Activities like Tai Chi, aquatic therapy, or specific resistance training routines designed to enhance eccentric strength, the lengthening phase of muscle contraction, are profoundly beneficial. These activities stimulate the remodeling of the facial tissues, increase the capillary density within the muscle, and reinforce the neural pathways that connect the brain to the periphery, all of which synergize perfectly with the biochemical foundation laid by the morning mineral protocol. It is also vital to address the profound impact of modern pharmaceuticals on mineral depletion, an issue that disproportionately affects the elderly who are often prescribed multiple medications simultaneously, a situation known as polypharmacy. Many common medications, particularly diuretics prescribed for hypertension, statins for cholesterol management, and proton pump inhibitors for acid reflux, are notorious for aggressively stripping the body of magnesium and essential trace minerals. Diuretics function by forcing the kidneys to excrete excess sodium and water to lower blood volume. But in this process, they indiscriminately flush out massive quantities of magnesium, potassium, and calcium. Proton pump inhibitors dramatically reduce the stomach acid required to digest conventional mineral supplements or extract nutrients from food, virtually guaranteeing a state of chronic malabsorption. Statins have been shown to interfere with the metabolic pathways that maintain muscle cell integrity, contributing directly to the muscle pain and cramping that are heavily documented side effects of these drugs. When an older adult is trapped in this pharmaceutical web, their baseline need for highly bioavailable, ionic trace minerals is exponentially higher than that of a younger, unmedicated individual. The before-breakfast protocol becomes not just a helpful supplement, but an absolute biological lifeline, a necessary daily intervention to counteract the intense iatrogenic depletion caused by their medication regimen. By utilizing the fasted morning window and the ionic form, we are slipping these vital nutrients past the systemic interference of the drugs, ensuring that the muscle cells receive the raw materials they desperately need to survive and function despite the pharmacological burden. The profound beauty of this scientific approach is that it demystifies the aging process and replaces fear with empowered, actionable understanding. We move away from viewing the elderly body as a spontaneously malfunctioning machine that must be sedated or ignored, and instead recognize it as a highly complex ecosystem that simply requires more precise, biocorrective inputs. When we isolate the specific physiological pathways where trace elements regulate neuromuscular signaling, we are no longer guessing. We are operating with the precision of a cellular engineer. We understand that the agonizing cramp in the middle of the night is not a punishment of old age, but a logical, predictable biochemical consequence of an energy deficit at the circuit pump, driven by a lack of MgATP, which is in turn caused by a depletion of ionic magnesium and its crucial trace mineral cofactors. By addressing this deficit with the precise timing of a pre-breakfast, fasted administration, we respect the physiological realities of the aging digestive tract and utilize the body's natural circadian rhythms for maximum absorption. As we conceptualize the incredible 3D reality of our muscle cells rehydrating, aquaporins opening, and the sliding filaments gliding effortlessly in a well-lubricated, electrically stable environment, we take ownership of our cellular health. We realize that preventing muscle atrophy and maintaining structural independence for long-term functional vitality is not an impossible dream, but a highly achievable physiological outcome based on the fundamental laws of biochemistry and cellular biology. By committing to this simple yet profoundly scientific morning protocol, older adults can permanently close the chapter on the terror of nocturnal leg cramps and step into a future defined by vibrant mobility, deeply restorative sleep, and the profound joy of a life lived free from the shadow of chronic pain.